Hey Gerhard, how you doing? Good morning for me and good evening to you.
Hey, good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Settling back in. I'm excited for summer to hit, and I'm also happy to get you on. I know you've been really busy with the new kid and everything else. How's that been going for you, by the way?
Yeah, pretty good. But it's a complete shift of life, I would say. So I have two
Yeah.
kids now. Second one is just like 6 months old.
Hmm.
Yeah, keeps me busy. Not too much time for community work and so on, but I'm still happy to be here and able to present something.
Yeah, I know both you and Kurt had a kid sometime in the last 6 months and everything. So,
Yeah,
congrats by the way on that too for the second kid.
thanks.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm glad to have you on. I just for some context to the people tuning in, like back even when I was working at like Power Pivot Pro, I remember that you'd done a couple like guest blogs for Rob and everything on DAX and his introduction to you. I remember way back when is like there's basically like a mad wizard individual who can write some really interesting crazy formulas with Dax back in the day, and I know like Rob was essentially my introduction to just knowing that you existed somewhere over in Europe.
Yeah, that's some time ago.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, you've
Yes.
since moved on to using a lot of other tools as well. And nowadays, I know you dabble more in the Azure space and a lot of stuff with PowerShell these days.
Yeah. Yeah, so I pretty much shifted I've come a lot from Microsoft background, let's say, where I did a lot of like analysis services, obviously, but also the whole like, data warehouse, relational database engine stuff, integration services, like the whole platform basically. And yeah, since Azure, since the cloud, I more or less moved on, let's say, to big data and AI and analytics or however you want to call it. But I'm still like, regardless of what project you do in the data space, at some point you always need reporting, and in the Microsoft ecosystem, well, there is like no way around Power BI, so I'm always still active there.
Well, and nowadays, like I mean, Power BI is not even its own platform anymore. Now it's a product within the Fabric platform that's expanded out. And
Exactly. Now it's
yeah,
getting much more interesting again for me.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I'm really looking forward how this turns out in the next months, let's say, and how the customers adopt it. But I'm
Yeah.
positive.
I think we're both excited about it. I don't know about you, and just one little digression about that. Then I'd love if you could maybe give kind of a bit of a background on yourself. But I've had so many customers chomp in at the bit for either a like, can you immediately help me start to deploy all these Fabric features or anything else? And it's like, every time something new and shiny comes out with Microsoft, I have to be like, it is exciting. It's going to continue to be exciting in the next 6 to 12 months, but it is in preview. This is something
Yeah,
to have. This is something that you can maybe for a department or a team, you can deploy some of this stuff. Don't go deploying this for like 5,000 people immediately in your organization necessarily. Have a slow, gradual rollout with this because like right
yeah,
now we're in the public dog food version where it's going to be tested with some telemetry features are going to be added, but people get really excited when a new toy comes out and they immediately want to have all their employees play with it. And you gotta kind of manage expectations sometimes.
yeah, yeah. That's true. There's a big hype at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cool stuff in there, but as you said, it's still in preview. There are some things, or there are some good reasons why it's still in preview. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Already found some bugs and stuff. But yeah, as I said, like really looking forward to GA and once all the major bugs are fixed and people actually start using it in production, and that's gonna be really interesting.
100%. But I think is a good starting point outside of the little background that I've given on how I just um, came across you years ago. Do you want to give a little bit more information on kind of who you are, where you came from, what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. So I well briefly mentioned it before already. So basically started like 18 years ago in the data space, let's say in the Microsoft data space, initially starting a lot of reporting services and kind of writing MDX back then, MDX queries on a multidimensional cube. I got into analysis services, which pretty fast caught my attention and my passion. And yeah, then I did a lot I was very active back then in the Microsoft forums, and that was probably also where I learned most of the things that I know now. Because for me, it's the easiest to get into new stuff by just looking at other people's problem and trying to solve them. And well, helps you, it helps them, and so it's a win-win. Yeah. So yeah, besides the analysis services part, as I said, I've always been working as a consultant, so building solutions for our customers. It's usually end to end, like building all the data integration part into SQL Server or data warehouse back then, with integration services, building the analysis services cube on top, doing the reporting, whether it's reporting services back then or Excel, whatever. And yeah, and I always stayed on the Microsoft SQL stack. So SQL Server 2000 onwards till 2019, I think, is the last one that I actually worked on. And yeah, then basically once the cloud got more mature and was adopted by more and more customers, I also shifted my focus towards data engineering, towards big data. Yeah, and that's, I think, where I'm nowadays still very much like implementing my own stuff, even though I also do architecture for our customers. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to get my hands dirty.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm similar there with you, and I mean, it does help to be a consultant because to a degree you have to be the end-to-end developer unless you have a good-sized team working underneath you. If there's only a couple people, you all have to play a lot of roles. But I do think that there's a bit of a knife's edge that's lost if you move purely into architecture or into just the management or guidance perspective, because then you're not actually the one playing with the code and doing the other stuff. So you'll still be able to advise, but it becomes a different skill set. I give me a Lego set, I'm happy. Like, I like to build, so I do enjoy the aspect of just give me some requirements, give me a good playlist, and let me spend a couple of days just building something out. Like, it's fun for me.
And the best thing is doing like a POC.
God.
You have some time, you have some challenges. That's what I really like.
Well, there's also some duct tape that goes into a POC, just because like the people don't like they might have a small budget needed to get a POC to then sell it to their execs who can then sign on for the large contract. But I built one for a government organization somewhere nearby within the last year or so, and there was a lot of things that they wanted to show, but very little time that they had. So at the back end, it was really like it was a lot of glue and duct tape that held the model together, but it looked pretty. And when the executives looked at the stuff, it did really cool things. But it was a lot of shoddily constructed data modeling to get it to do that. It only like 30 hours.
Yeah, I know the repos that you are doing, and that's just super crazy. I could never do that.
Yeah.
I'm more on the backend side, to be honest.
Exactly.
Because yeah, I mean, building a report is nice, but then reworking it over and over again because the customer wants to have it moved 1 pixel to the left and 1 font size bigger and whatever. I don't know. Drives me crazy sometimes.
Last little plug I'll give to that, and then I think we'll have a good segue to also talking about some CI/CD we'll be discussing today. I know I've seen some conversations in the chat of people who are curious what CI/CD represents as a word, but also what does it define. But my last little comment on the reporting and pixel movement, I know a lot of us have been excited. You included with Timdal and Power BI for developers and all this stuff coming out. So we're getting so many more modeling features and a way to do automation for that and easy scripting. I do hope in the near future that we get something like that for reporting. So whenever that comes out, a definition language like that for the report layer files, I cannot wait to see the amount of external tools and stuff where you could like click a button and things realign or retitle, recolor, and all this other stuff. Yeah, but it's basically have a best practices analyzer type thing. Like, that's my dream, and if I have the time, I might end up trying to make one myself for whatever best practice that I have. But the automation of report cleanup with button presses, I feel like is just right at the end of that rainbow. That's like really close. I'm starting to see a light. I feel like that might hopefully be coming soon. So fingers crossed on that. But yeah.
I would love to see that. I think it's much more complex than just like
Yeah.
using Timble or the metadata of a data set
Yeah.
and working on that. So like a report definition is much more complex, I'm afraid. So I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know what's coming in the future, but yeah, I'm also looking forward if there is something.
Fingers
Fingers crossed.
crossed. Yeah. Perfect. But yeah, with that, let's kind of talk about what we'll be getting into today. I know, REST APIs and CI/CD is mentioned in there. I think we'll have probably people in the audience who have a mixture of like, I've done this before. I'm, an intermediate user. I'm looking to upgrade, and probably some people who are just like, what are all these terms? So maybe we can start kind of like describing like, what does this mean as far as like the concept of CI/CD?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So, what is CI/CD? Basically, yeah, CI/CD stands for continuous integration, continuous development. So basically, automation of certain tasks when it comes to the deployment of, let's say, artifacts. In our case, it would be obviously Power BI artifacts like data sets, reports, etc. It's originally coming from software projects. So whenever you work on a software project, there is usually some automated testing involved whenever you publish like a new change, etc. And to some degree, you also want to bring this to Power BI. Not specifically about testing, that's also possible, but it's much harder, but not more about the deployment side. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you want to achieve in the end, that you have like a deployment pipeline where you click a button and all your changes like data sets, reports, dashboards, whatever, get deployed to the test environment where it is tested. And if everything is fine in the test environment, it gets pushed to the production environment, where it's finally reaching the end users. Sounds super simple, but it's actually super complex to set up. But once you have set it up, it makes your life so much easier because you don't have to worry about different manual things that you did previously when you wanted to move some new features into production. Because if you have it set it up, it's just the click of a button basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it also allows you some other pretty cool features, which is like change tracking. So who changed which report, for example, or which measure. That's sometimes that's even mandatory for auditing. So I don't know if you have like a report that's used to generate some quarterly or yearly report that's publicly shared. You may need to you probably need to be able to reconstruct it at any time. And that's only possible if you have all the data and the metadata and the definitions in some kind of repository stored, from where you can always go back to a previous version and deploy that version if necessary.
And one thing I just want to call out on this, because they like somebody mentioned, yeah, I think similar to how my brain considered is the artifact. Yeah, I think when I first came across that, like an Indiana Jones relic thing that's sitting in a warehouse. But I've always found it interesting that Microsoft refers to basically any object in the Power BI service as an artifact. So they report the data set, all of those. I've always been, yeah, I know it comes more from a coding term, but yeah, any unique object that can be created, added, or put into the Power BI service is referred to as those. So when you're reading documentation, that's the word that you'll come across. I still think like object or something else sounds better. Artifact seems dusty in my head and like an old thing.
Yeah,
that's I believe it's a software term, isn't it?
Yeah, in that particular context, it's actually also not the single report or the single data set. It's like the whole, let's say, package or the whole solution that you want to deploy. So basically, what you do in the continuous integration part is you take the latest data set, report, etc. that you want to deploy. Maybe you test it, whatever. But in the end, you package it into an artifact, an immutable artifact. Okay, and that artifact you then take and deploy the very same artifact to test. You deploy the very same artifact to production, so that you make sure that it is really the very same that you are deploying. Obviously, there is some logic on top where you need to adopt some parameters, some connection strings, etc. When deploying to test or to production, because well, you want to have the test and production data in that particular environment. But that's the idea of this immutable artifact that I'm referring here. So like the whole deployable solution in that case.
Thank you for the context. I think that's super helpful. I know, like, I mean, Microsoft's already pretty bad at vernacular and like acronyms and special words, but I think once you start even getting into like Azure and CI/CD stuff, there's just even that much more of them. So I think it's good to, always just give a little context with some of those, just to make sure
Yeah,
people get the right word.
sure. Yeah. So and the heart of every CI/CD pipeline is basically a code repository where all the source code is stored. So that's a bit special again for Power BI, because we only to some degree have actual source code. What we are usually dealing with is data sets, reports, which usually come in a PBIX file, right? Which is a binary file and doesn't really reveal a lot of information of what's in there, nor can you actually compare particular PBIX files to see what actually changed from one version to the other. But that's some part that we will cover. So so generally speaking about CI/CD and Power BI, I think Power BI was never created with the intention in mind to make it usable for CI/CD pipelines. Okay?
I
So
completely agree.
in the very beginning, there was like no CI/CD story, so it was pretty hard for especially for enterprise customers that used Power BI for the enterprise data models to actually do create some proper solutions with Power BI, right?
It's basically just a new type of Office file, with reporting
Yeah,
bits into it. Like, take
exactly.
Excel, make it better. And like, also Office files were not really built for CI/CD either. So yeah, I completely agree. Its initial vision was not for that.
So, but obviously, Microsoft realized pretty fast that like also the enterprise business is a huge business, and they also already had a lot of enterprise clients, obviously, with on-prem solutions like analysis services, which also wanted to move to Power BI. Hence, there were a lot of movements in the recent years to make this more accessible also or more appealing actually to enterprise solutions. So what they actually implemented or introduced, first of all, REST APIs that allowed you to interact with the Power BI service in an automated way. Then I don't know when deployment pipelines actually were added. I guess it's like 3 years ago. It's just a rough estimate though, where they basically built like some native deployment pipelines within Power BI, which to some degree are good, but also not covering all the aspects that I would usually expect from a CI/CD solution. In the recent years, they also added XMLA endpoints for read and write and the external tools. So like the professional developer toolings, like Tableau Editor or ALM Toolkit, whatever, which made at least the data set, the data set or the CI/CD story for data sets much better, because it was basically on pair with Azure Analysis Services or SQL Server Analysis Services. And yeah, the last thing that they introduced, which is really hot, as it was just released like 2 weeks ago and Build Conference, is the Git integration for Power BI workspaces. Really looking forward for this in GA and how this develops over time, because I think this is what most of the people were looking and waiting for since ages, actually, since Power BI was released in its current form. But still, at the moment, even though considering all the stuff that I mentioned above, from my point of view, there is still no real end-to-end story when it comes to CI/CD for Power BI. And that's, from my point of view, mainly related to some missing APIs that are mandatory to actually do this properly. Okay. Main things here is so like usually best practice, if you want to distribute the reports, you create an app, right? And then you update the app whenever there's a change and you publish it, etc. Thing is that there is like no API that would allow you to add like new reports or new data sets to an existing app, for example. Okay, so this limits that feature quite a lot, because you still have to manually add a new report to the app, for example. Also the Git integration. The Git integration itself is super cool. It works pretty well, but also there is no API yet. I'm quite sure it will come in the near future, but as of now, there is no API that would allow you to do the syncing between the Git repository and the Power BI workspace automatically. Right.
Fingers. I'm sure that's, be looking at a crystal ball, something that's gotta happen. But yeah, it's
that's also what I expect. So
yeah.
But still, at the moment, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I also want to cover all the three main solutions in some more detail. I also have some demos. I don't know if I want to show this one for the deployment pipelines, maybe briefly. So as I said, like deployment pipelines in Power BI are natively integrated. They allow you to deploy changes from one workspace, like from a dev workspace to a test workspace to a production workspace. It's actually pretty cool. Supports all objects, so not only data sets or only reports, but also dashboards and data marts, and I think also data flows, if I'm not mistaken. But it's missing, like that's my main complaint about it, is that there is like no integration with the Git repository, right? So it is pretty hard, or it's actually impossible to see what actually changed over time when you did a couple of deployments. Okay. Also linked to that first issue, it's not possible to roll back a change. So if you deployed something to production and you realize afterwards it's not working properly, you cannot just roll it back, right? Which is a huge issue for enterprise customers, obviously, because there's always things that could go wrong, and if you deploy something that's not working, that's just not good. There are some other things in there that it's only supporting 3 stages, which is usually fine, like dev, test, production. But I also had customers that had like 7 or 8 stages, and obviously that's also not a solution then.
I would like to pause on so I feel like at least for me, like 50-50, like smaller businesses kind of just do 2, because the devs and the tests are usually one in the same team. They're just like, we can do everything just in one workspace, move it to production afterwards. As you grow in a company and you have more discrete stages, then you actually benefit from dev, test, prod. But for publishing changes out to like final production, what would 7 stages look like? That seems like a lot.
Yeah, this particular case, there was a was a solution for one of our customers, and they were kind of deploying the same solution to different, let's say regional subsidiaries. Okay, so like you had like one environment in the US, they had one environment in Asia, they had one environment in Europe, and in the end, so they had like dev, test, and then those in the end like 4 or 5 production environments basically.
Okay, so that makes more sense. So multiple production. I was thinking there was like 6 or 7 stages for development and testing, which that makes a lot more sense. It's a multi-production scenario. 1
or 2 I had that in the past, but in that particular case was for multiple production deployments.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, the last part or last point that I mentioned here is that, usually best practice is to separate data sets and reports. That obviously in that case also doesn't work, because you need to deploy that one workspace, or it's tied to one workspace. And if you separate reports and data sets, well, you're not deploying both at the same time. Perfect. So just to briefly show you, that's what it looks like. So you have like the deployment pipelines here in your Power BI portal. Then you have like those 3 stages: development, test, and production. Each one is tied to a workspace, and then you can basically compare the objects between the different stages. As you can see, the development and test was just recently deployed, so there's like this green check mark here that says everything is up to date. But if I go here to test and production, it tells me, okay, there are some new reports in test that I would need to move to production. And what I can do now is I can just update the app, which would then move the new items to production. As I said, working for datasets, reports, data marts, etc. But that's about it, right?
Yep.
You can also say Yep.
I was going to say one quick mention on this, just to continue to give some plugs for the expansion of Fabric, because it's all going to be basically in this Power BI interface. The goal with a lot of these is related items to Power BI and other stuff will continue to be integrated with more of those artifacts and other things that will start to exist within the Trident platform that will eventually be coming to be these pipelines as well. Basically, whatever you be able to have within a workspace for Power BI. So I do like that this is going to continue to get integrated and expanded out to allow you to use this for CI/CD with other items that can be created within Fabric.
Yeah. Yeah. So and what you see here is, I mean, you can update the app, but you don't know what actually changed. So I know it, okay. Like this one was there before. Let me check. Oh, that's the dashboard. We go to a data set. So this one, AdventureWorks DB 2012, that's a data set that was in here. Might have changed. I don't know if I actually have a change here, but you wouldn't know, first of all, what changed, and also the change would not be tracked. That's, as I said, like my biggest complaint about this. So it's nice for smaller solutions, but I don't think it's enterprise ready, right?
Agreed.
So coming back to the slides, then when it comes to enterprise, especially the XMLA endpoints and external tools, made it much better. Because you could now basically use the very same CI/CD operations, or the very same approaches that you used to do for Azure Analysis Services and for other enterprise data models like SQL Server Analysis Services, basically. So the idea is that all the content of a data set is stored as a BIM file, as a metadata. Mm-hmm. And this is then used for the deployment. Okay, so the thing is that, well, obviously this only works for data sets, so it doesn't help in any way for reports, for dashboards, or whatever. So that's definitely a big con here. But for data sets, it's working pretty well. And as we are now only talking about metadata, you can easily integrate this into a Git repository and have all the stuff in there that you're used to from traditional software engineering, like change tracking, pull requests, approvals, and stuff like that, which is super important for enterprise customers.
So Donald just had a quick question. He thought there might have been either a recent feature add or announcement of an option to kind of see diffs between the files, that outside of like third-party tools. I wasn't aware of any.
I'm not aware, to be honest, but it could be, yes.
As one just quick mention of that,
in the pipelines and deployment pipelines.
Yeah, yes. I wasn't aware of anything in deployment pipelines for that level of detail for diff comparisons.
Okay.
Generally, I go to like. Historically, it'll usually like be Power BI Sentinel or something else if I want a quick and easy plug and play solution for people to do diff tracking and all that.
Yeah, I think even if you would know that, I don't know, like a measure changed, that information is lost once you deployed it, right?
Yeah.
Or once you update the prod stage, and well, then that information is lost, and then you again do not know what changed when. And if you try to reconstruct a report from like, I don't know, like a month ago, where some measures changed, some relationships were added, etc. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, coming back to the XMLA endpoint and external tools. I think the most common tools here would be Tabular Editor, ALM Toolkit, and PBI tools. I think you had all the guys on the stream already. So if you're interested in this, just search the history. But as I said, like that's for data sets only. You still need to have like some automation tool where that code actually runs. And you need to set it up. So that's not like a nice UI. It's usually in Azure DevOps pipelines in YAML. which can be quite complex and is quite technical actually. But I want to briefly show you what this looks like. I had a demo. It's working by now, but I still just show you the results. So what you would usually do when you want to implement a new solution or a new feature, you create a branch, you create a feature branch, then you check out the feature branch locally, do your changes and check it back in. In that particular case, we want to manage, as I said, like Power BI artifacts in there. So there are some PBIX files in there, for example. One important thing here is in general, I would not recommend storing PBIX files in a repository unless it's empty, right? So you don't want to store like 5 gigabytes of a PBX file in a Git repository. That's not what it's.
I agree.
That's not what it was built for. What you can do is, so there's basically two options. You can either store the PBIT, like the template file, or what I actually prefer is having like a parameter in my data set that controls how much data is actually loaded. So
yep, agreed.
It has an option like empty and full. And before I check it in, I set it to empty, refresh it. It takes a couple of seconds usually because, well, just loading nothing, and then check it in. There's a couple of reasons for that, because a couple of reasons why this is, I think, superior to Power BI templates. One reason is that you cannot publish a PBIT file, right? So if you want to publish a PBIT file, you need to open it in Power BI desktop and then publish it manually. So that's not something that you can automate. So that's why I usually prefer PBX files. And also working with PBX files is easier because you have everything in there already and you don't need to reload it every time, even if the data set is empty. Okay.
I'm guessing that this parameter, like drop-down selection, is probably just feeding a top n row limit thing for the queries that you're loading in, or
exactly. Yeah, so I usually have a filter. Yeah. It's either a no filter, which would be full load. It can be a filter where 1 equals 0, basically loading nothing, just the metadata. Or I usually also implement something called limited, where I just load a subset of data that's important for me or for my current developments. Right.
So I've found that, and maybe it's changed, but at least when I tried a few years ago to completely empty a table, if there's no data in the column, sometimes the data type that was already set in the model goes back to general or like undefined. Like if you had set it to decimal with a comma and like any kind of information assigned to that, when it empties out, that goes away. So I've at least been for the last few years doing like 10 rows. Or just something really small, just so there's data in there, because I've just found some weird glitches when the table completely empties out with relationships and other stuff sometimes. Maybe that's changed, but again, it's been like probably 3 years since I've had this practice, just because I remember doing that once, and when the data came back in, there were some things I had to go redo just because at one point a fully empty table was loaded.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I haven't had any issues like that in the past, but I'll watch out for this.
They might have fixed it, at that point. Like maybe it was just enough customers were complaining about that or something.
Yeah. Okay. So now what we have right now, like we have checked in the PBX file into Git. So that doesn't yet really solve our problem of having proper change tracking and version control. So what comes into play here is the extraction of metadata. So you can use the XMLA endpoint to extract the metadata of the data set, of the data model, into like a readable format. It can either be like a huge JSON file or a BIM file, or tools like Tabular Editor and I think also PBI tools support the extraction into a so-called folder structure. Okay, that's what you see here. So basically, that PBX files contains a lot of tables. Those are like my tables. Those tables have columns, and they might also have measures. I think here we have also measures. Okay, and the process of extracting this information is in this case automated in Azure DevOps. So we have a pipeline that basically checks whenever a PBX file is changed, it extracts the metadata. The way we do it is we just take the PBX file, upload it to the service, spin up tabular editor, extract the metadata, and store it in the folder. And then push those changes back to the Git repository.
Exactly.
What this creates for you is that if you are now working in your feature branch, you did this process, you opened the PBX in desktop, did some changes, and stored the PBX back, or checked it back into Git, the pipeline kicks in, extracts the metadata, and what it presents you is the following. So that's now a pull request that I created from my branch back to the main branch that's then deployed. And what you get is you get a pretty clear view of what actually changed. So in that particular case, let's just focus on this content part here, because that's the metadata that's extracted. So the PBX file obviously changed, okay? But I can also see what else changed in here. So I did a change in my sales amount measure. I added times 1.2, okay? So you see pretty clear what changed. You also see, well, there was a new measure added, which is called order quantity. See that little plus in here. And also in the product table, a new hierarchy was created, okay? And that's stored within your Git repository. It will remain in there forever, like the history of those changes.
Yep.
And you can even like tag a particular change for something, and then you can always easily find that particular change. Usually it's linked to a work item in Azure DevOps, and then you can just go to that work item, go to the Git repository branch, and see all the changes that were done as part of that particular work item or user story. Okay, so that's basically the idea of professional development, and also change tracking, history, etc. Right?
Well, and being able to not like identify something like this immediately without having to go hunting on your own, I think is the time-saving elements of that, and also allowing for like multi-author scenarios, because the person doesn't need to know the file to be able to discover this. So it allows for, I think, easier handoffs and then and neutral management without necessarily a familiarity with the data set.
Yeah, what you can also do is you not necessarily need a PBX file. You can also do everything that we've seen here without the PBX file, but with tabular editor, for example, only. If you prefer that, so that's also possible. Exactly. It's just about having like the data in smaller files, smaller chunks, so it's easier for you to review it. Okay, and then I could just merge this into production, into my main branch, and then it can be deployed from there. The deployment itself then can either be with tabular editor again, using the folder metadata, or you could potentially also update the PBX file. It's totally up to you then. I would usually use the tabular editor approach though.
I'd agree.
Yeah. What also comes into play here is you usually, when you deploy from dev to test or to production, some parameters change. Okay, so for example, you're doing reporting on top of a SQL database, and obviously you have one SQL database for development, you have one for test, and you have one for production. So once you deploy your data set to the test environment, for example, you also need to make sure that the data source points to the test SQL database. Okay. Again, best practice, usually you have like parameters for this and update those parameters as part of the deployment. Okay, that's again, that's where the REST APIs come into play, and especially for everything that we're discussing right now, REST APIs are just fundamental, right? What we tend to do when we build those kind of solutions for our customers, we created like a framework, let's say, with a so-called manifest, where you basically define what you want to deploy. I'm switching here to Visual Studio Code. So that file is in the repository, and it basically describes your deployment. Okay, it says, okay, you have a workspace. The workspace is called test project. It has some Power BI workspace ID associated with it. It contains some data sets. Those data sets have parameters. And you see those dollar signs, those are variables. And those can be substituted at runtime with the values from the environment, like from test environment or from production environment. Okay, so we have like the very same manifest that's being deployed to your environment. It's just that some particular values change. Okay, and those values are stored in an environment file like this. So for production, I don't know, my workspace ID is this, whereas for test, my workspace ID is this. So that's the only configuration that you do here, basically. And then you can take the very same solution and deploy it to multiple environments. If I would need to create like another environment, I could just add another variables file here, change the variables accordingly, and it would be very easy for me to just deploy it to a fourth environment or fifth or a sixth or whatever.
It saves a lot of time being able to just like batch script it from here for sure.
Exactly. So that's the basic idea here, and also like doing reports, and then once you create a report, you deploy it, you also need to update the report so it points to so it doesn't point to the dataset in dev, but points to the dataset in test or in production, wherever you deploy it to, and that's all automatically covered. And under the hood, it's basically using PowerShell and the Power BI PowerShell module that's supplied by Microsoft. Unfortunately, that's also not covering all the different REST API calls, but just some of them. So you still need to create some API calls on your own in PowerShell then. It's just a bit of a pain, but yeah, I think that's the best that we have so far. So
now, how for the little plugin that you made, out of curiosity, for VSCode, you know, for a lot of this management and kind of admin viewing, like how much time did you spend to build that? Yeah.
But that part now, or for that VSCode integration that I'm showing later? So that's not the VSCode integration that's in the title. That's something that's still the let's say professional.
I wasn't sure if you're going to show that. So like yeah, just because I do know you built one. So okay, so you will be.
I'll show it later.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so. Yeah, so that's basically what you can do with a proper CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps or in GitHub Actions or wherever you want to host it. It gives you all this nice features of this easily adding like new reports, new data sets, doing this change tracking and history and stuff. So that's pretty cool and can save a lot of time once it's set up correctly. But again, like coming back to the limitations, whenever we use an approach like this, we are limited by the REST APIs. So there are some REST APIs that are supported, or some actions that are supported by REST APIs, some that are not. And especially for deployment, there are some that are missing. So you can, as of now, never do a fully fledged deployment with all features that would be available in the UI, because you just cannot automate them using REST APIs. The last thing with regards to CI/CD that I wanted to show though is the Git integration for workspaces. So that was released together with Microsoft Fabric. Let me just check. I do have it. I think it's here. Yeah, so you probably, if you have like a premium workspace, you probably realized it's actually not part of Fabric. That's interesting. So it was just released at the very same time. You can now basically connect a Power BI workspace to a Git repository. Okay. Usually, it would allow you to sync the changes between the repository and the workspace with regards to, which is working for reports and data sets. So you can sync from the workspace into the Git repository, do some changes there, like use tabular editor and change the BIM file, store it back in the repository, then sync the changes back to the workspace. Okay, that's really cool, because that's basically what I'm doing manually with the PowerShell code, but this is native, right?
Yes, exactly.
And yeah, it supports all kinds of changes, so it's not limited to any restrictions like for external tools. You cannot, I don't know, create hierarchies. If you maintain the metadata using tabular editor, you can do all the changes or any changes that you ever want to do in the repository, and just use this feature to merge them back or sync them back to the workspace. Okay, and this will also be the future. I think Christian mentioned it on your last call, Reed, right? That there will also be some integration in Power BI Desktop that would allow you to interact with this kind of metadata more easily and make Power BI more easily integratable with Git repositories.
And just as one quick plug with that is I did just confirm actually as of yesterday, Rui will be on July 15th to do a deeper dive into Power BI developer mode and some of the Git integrations that are in preview. But the future is definitely bright when it comes to more of the, Christian Wade clicky, draggy, droppy to be able to do Git integrations. And, I'm just excited because when we talk about like branching and all that other stuff, like I consider myself a 3 out of 10 in terms of Git. Like I know how to use it, I've deployed it, but I'm more on the Power BI side than that other stuff, and it can be very technical. So just the ability to use that for small businesses and have an easier integration without having to get super technical with as many external tools, I think will be really good going forward. I think it's going to go from an expert tool to an intermediate tool. It will never be. I don't think it'll ever be beginner, but I think it's going to move towards an intermediate tool for customers and less of an advanced feature. So that's what's exciting me for me.
Yeah, that's actually a huge challenge because when it comes to, for example, report development, it's usually not like an IT professional that does it. It's usually like the business users that do it, and it can be hard to explain to business users all this the Git stuff, etc. So they don't care about that, right? They just want to build the report and have it deployed somehow. They don't want to know that. But making it easier for them to actually integrate their work with Git might open a door for those people too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I do think like it'll be the business, like the business analyst or the report developer will be the one who will be able to use this. I don't know if Git will ever become like a citizen developer thing, but it's at least going to move down from that expertise level. IT is not necessarily the one that has that will be forced to do it anymore. Just the developer for that small team will be able to use it pretty easily. Yeah,
so that's why I think this is a huge change. I finally got it working. That one is running on a premium workspace on an Azure capacity. I had to start the capacity, so it's a premium feature. As it's also using the XMLA endpoint on the hood. But as you can see here now, it's linked to a Git repository. It's linked to my main branch. There's some changes that I did, I think, online, and I can now sync them back to the repository. But it works both ways. So that's pretty cool, and definitely the future. So you should definitely have a look at this. And also, as Reed just mentioned, watch out for this Power BI Desktop developer mode, which makes this integration much tighter.
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay. So that's it basically for CI/CD part that I wanted to cover. As you have seen, it's basically boils down to REST APIs. Also the Git integration as of now, that like this one, you can do a commit and sync, etc. here in the UI, but there is no REST API for this yet. So until that's here, it's not yet usable for CI/CD pipelines from my point of view. But I'm quite sure this will come sooner or later because So yeah, as I said, like REST APIs, whenever it comes to automation of any kind of stuff, nowadays always via REST APIs. Most operations supported, unfortunately not all. I just also put the links here for the REST API in general, and also for the PowerShell module that you can use, or that I use for my developments. And yeah, so that's it now for the CI/CD parts. If there are no questions, I would also very much like to introduce a tool that I've been working on the last months, actually, that make those APIs more accessible. Okay.
Nothing that I don't think I've brought up earlier or dropped a couple of links. There's a few questions to chat between them, but yeah, nothing directly related left that we have anything that's on screen. So yeah, I'd love to get a deep dive into that tool you've been building out.
Yeah. Okay. So the tool. So what I've been building was or is an integration into Visual Studio Code that basically takes whatever is exposed by the REST API and surfaces it in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so the extension is live, so you can just go open Visual Studio, go to extensions and search for Power BI. It's the only extension there, and I'll give you now a brief demo of what it's capable. So if you go to you open Visual Studio, go to search for Power BI. You type it correctly. That's that one extension. It's only one here. And once you install it, it basically gives you this new icon on the left side saying Power BI. And once you click it, you usually need to connect. So you need to connect using the accounts icon on the left bottom. And then it just uses your Microsoft account to authenticate against Power BI. Once you're connected, it, as of now, has 4 tabs in here. One is for the workspace, so when you can browse your workspace, your data sets. One is for capacities, to see your capacities. That's not very advanced at the moment. Also the gateways is still work in progress. And also the deployment pipelines. Okay. So if I go here, it could be any workspace. That's just the one that I've chosen for my demo. You can expand the workspace, see all the data sets, see the reports in here. And can basically do some operations. Like you can obviously delete stuff here. You can update parameters. So if your report has parameters, you can update the parameters. So
now, curiously, did you just find the icons for all these online, or were these just fetched from anywhere?
Some of them are the actual ones from Power BI.
Okay.
I think most of them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and they look very similar to at least the dataset one and the report one.
Dataset report, also the for the deployment pipelines, I took them from the official repo.
Excellent. Yeah.
So make it look like Power BI, right? So as you can see here, like this particular report, like it's a sample one that has like 5 parameters. It actually doesn't do much. It allows me to basically update the parameters. What's really nice here is that you probably know that whenever you create like a parameter that's sourced by a list, if you try to change the parameter in the Power BI web UI, it doesn't expose you the available values. It's just like a plain text box for you, even though the API underneath surfaces those values. So I can get them and present them to you. And that's what I'm doing here. That's like a true false parameter, some numeric one. You can change them here. Some date value and also some text value. So once I change them, see here, for example, it now says some other text and some other port number. So you can now from Visual Studio Code, you can just change the parameters, which is pretty cool. You can also start a refresh here. So you usually change the parameters, start a refresh, and then you would also see if the dataset was actually refreshed. See the different refreshes that happened in the past. So you have like one nice view where you see the failed and succeeded refresh operations, etc. Okay. What else is in here is that it supports drag and drop. So you may know that there is an API called Rebind API that allows you to rebind one report to another data set. So what you can do now is you can just take the report, drag it over to another data set, and then say you can choose an action. In this case, it would be rebind. And now it's basically rebinding that particular report to the data set on which you drop it. Okay, so that's something that you just cannot do in the Power BI UI. But now you can do it in Visual Studio Code using the REST APIs pretty easily without any understanding of REST APIs at all. Besides that, there is also another one. If you drag a report on another report, there is a REST API called update content, which basically just replaces the report content of the target report with the content from the source report. So the data sources or connections would not change; it would just update the content. Okay, that can be quite handy for deployments.
Two questions I just wanted to pop up onto you. So. Great name, by the way, Bootleg Batman. Wanted to know, can you manipulate report content?
Not really. So what you can do is, as I just showed, you can update the content of one report with the content of another report, but you cannot modify like a chart. So
the endpoint today does not give any access for object level changes within a report.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So again, like here again, we are limited by the REST APIs. Whatever is supported, we could technically surface here, but that's not something that's exposed by the REST APIs.
Yep. And one other, just quickly from John, he wanted to do the pipelines showed the deployment rules.
Pipeline deployment rules. Whether it's so, that's something I didn't show. I'll briefly jump back if I find it. Yeah, so deployment rules are. Oh, let's take this one. What you can do in Power BI deployment pipelines is that you can define rules. So whenever you use a parameter, you can specify that the parameter is changed whenever it's deployed to that stage. Okay, excellent. So that's a rule that you can create here. Yeah, but doesn't really matter. So that's something that you can do here, but that's again nothing that I would know that surfaced via a REST API. So you can, as of now, not create deployment rules via the REST API. Hence, we can also not do it here. Okay, so but that's a good link to the second major part of the extension. Also pipelines. So you also have the pipelines tab here, where you also have the different stages, and you can also start a deployment from here. Okay, so you can kick off a deployment, which basically, if I click this button, it's basically starting a deployment from development to test. If I click the same icon on test, it's basically doing a deployment from test to production. That particular case would be a full deployment, but I can also drill down and say, okay, I only want to deploy dashboards or only want to deploy data sets, or even go further down and say, okay, I only want to deploy one particular data set. Okay, so if I click that button here, it would just deploy that AdventureWorks DB 2012 to the next stage. Okay, so this can make the life for if you use like deployment pipelines, this can make your life much easier because you have all your deployment pipelines in one place and can start the deployments individually. We also surface you with the history so that you can see, okay, whenever it was deployed from dev to test, there was a deployment from test to production. If you hover over it,
right there, one of my favorite things, just the immediate historical view that you have into there with all that information. That's really, yeah, this interface is fantastic.
Yeah, so that gives you most of the information that you will need, and actually it's the very same information that's also available in the Power BI web UI. So that's all you can get at the moment. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. And then, as I said, like it's mainly about REST APIs. I also created a so-called notebook view. Okay, so if I select any item here, and then you see like this little notebook icon at the top, if you can click it, it's basically opening a notebook that allows you to interact with the REST API.
Exactly.
So you basically define the method here, and then the API endpoint. Oh, sorry, it's a bad example.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, no, it's actually so that's the information about that that group. You can also add another dash. It gives you like auto completion. It says, okay, well, underneath my workspace, I would have data sets, for example. And it lists you all the data sets here. Then you can further go under my data sets. I want to pick my adventure work simple. And this one has, for example, parameters. I don't know if this one actually has parameters, but oh, it has. Okay, perfect. That gives you basically all the REST API results here. Okay, so that allows you to write any arbitrary REST API call that you can think of. Okay, and it's not only working with GET requests. You can also do a POST request, for example. If I go to my groups, search for my let's take my, this one I think refreshes. Then I can also create a POST request, and it even gives you the examples that are in the documentation. So if you need to provide a body to your API call, you can do it like this. Okay. So you can specify for example, for a refresh, you can specify the table name, partition name, etc. That's just working the very same way. And it's pretty easy with all the examples in there that you can just autocomplete into the notebook cell and then run it. So I could technically run this now. Should hopefully work. Yeah, it's accepted. Now, if I could go here and refresh my refreshes, so you see another one. It's unknown. It's running, or it's not yet started though. But still, click refresh a couple of times. It will probably take a couple of minutes till it's finished. So as you can see, like it's also interactive. Whatever you do in the notebook, it's immediately reflected on the left side. Yeah, the tool is supposed to make it easier for you to use the REST API and work with it, for testing, but also for production scenarios, obviously.
Well, honestly, I think just the organization of this kind of makes using the API, I think, a bit less scary for people, because much of this is, you've essentially provided almost a SaaS service on top of this, leveraging that. So I think this is super useful for a lot of people wanting to do more admin and management. As we know, like historically, Power BI has kind of had very crap global management for all workspaces versus individual workspaces, and even then, the reports have been very so.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, all the code is open source. It's in my Git repository. You'd easily find it if you just click here and then you go to repository. So if you have any other ideas or any feature requests, or maybe you want to contribute, just reach out to me. I'm happy for all contributions, because I think it is already really powerful, but it could do so much more. But it's just some really time consuming integrating all the different APIs.
And two things on that. I feel like the best external tools like this are usually built by people who want them for themselves first. Like I need a better management system for me and my clients.
Yeah.
That's how DAX Studio came out. That's how Tabular Editor came out. But feedback is very important. So I want to just, emphasize that from you. All of Gerhard's contact info is down in the description below this video. So if you want to use this, feedback for testing and other stuff, because there's a lot of it's impossible to test for everything individually, so that really does help this grow faster and turn into a better version of itself.
Exactly. yeah, and I think that's it then. What I wanted to show, what we wanted to discuss. The refresh is hopefully done by now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been fantastic. I mean, again, just kudos for building such a fantastic tool. How long did that take, uh, if I may ask, and you're willing to share, to build that?
I actually I don't know. It's something that I do when I don't know I'm sitting in the train going to the office.
Mm, fair enough.
um, so, but it's some days, weeks I would say in total. Um, yeah,
A couple of other
and it's also
questions I want to
something that
throw
I
out.
wasn't familiar with before. So
Yeah.
those of you who know me, I also did something similar for Databricks. I wrote a tool
Hmm.
for Databricks REST API. And I could reuse some of the basic stuff for authentication and the tree view stuff, etc. So it was easier. But it's a lot of work, especially if you want to make the UI look nice. Sometimes I'm just like spending hours on trying to make an icon look good because I'm not a graphic designer, obviously, and I'm using paint and stuff and trying to make it look nice. Yeah.
Well, I feel like there's kind of the joke is like a coder or a developer will spend 30 hours to automate something that takes 5 minutes a week or something like that. But it's not necessarily just because like it's a time saving thing anymore. A lot of times you're doing a bunch of stuff you haven't done, so you do get a bunch of new tools in your tool belt.
Yeah, yeah,
But
definitely.
because you're learning a whole bunch of new things for your skill set. So yeah, you've spent a lot of time doing that. That will take a while to probably get back that credit from whatever you've automated. But yeah, I've built plenty of those things before. Like, oh, this will be a 3-hour project, and then 30 hours later, I'm still working on this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, but so I'm a guy that gets into this, and I'm just hooked by this stuff. And yeah, if I'm not finishing it, I can't sleep well. So
Yep. A couple questions left that I wanted to pull up, I think, for a Q&A as we wrap up. So John had another good question. So and I missed this a little earlier, John, but when you were in your screen earlier that I can go back to, can you save the notebook and sync it back to a Fabric? Could you make a notebook sync it to Fabric using Synapse Visual Studio Code extension you were showing?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. It's not actually related to Fabric or notebooks per se. Like the notebook that you see here is like just like a Visual Studio Code notebook. It's not, it has nothing to do with Fabric or Synapse.
Okay.
It's just like a kind of file type that I invented.
Yeah,
Which
because
is
they do have the
just
Fabric notebooks and every thing now. So like that, like I think that's maybe where the question might have come from. But John, feel free to elaborate if you had anything, if you had a follow up to that.
yeah. So as I said, like this, it is a notebook because I just got very much used to the notebook experience, and the Visual Studio Code has a pretty nice integration of those notebooks. But it's not in any way related to Synapse notebooks or Fabric notebooks.
Fair enough. One other, Picius, I believe, Picus, one of the two. Hopefully I got it right. So can you create a pipeline and then assign workspaces to it all from within this?
Assign a workspace. Yeah, technically you could do that. As of now, it's not yet supported. No. So you can do it. Maybe if that's a feature that you need, you can just go to the repository and create a feature request. It should be pretty easy to implement this. So you could then potentially just go here and then take the workspace, drag it over here to my test stage. That's something that would be doable without too much effort. So yeah, just open a ticket and then the repository, and I'll look into it.
Excellent. Perfect. Us here, yeah. So yeah, Gerhard, this has been fantastic. I'm definitely think this was a good deep dive into CI/CD, and I like the little package that's built on top of it that you've taken the time to build out. I do think that we continuously moving away from needing everybody to code this kind of stuff themselves will continue to allow us to increase adoption for clients and other people. And again, moving from the advanced developer for these platforms to the intermediate developer. So I think this is definitely good progress forwards, and I encourage everyone who's wanting to play around with this to install it and try it out. Like, you know, this is fully a fully free tool to use, to my understanding, and and something that you built, you know, kind of to help support both what you do, but also the community. So it's good to see these kind of things continue to be built out. I will be, like I said, curious to see, you know, what other automations and stuff you built out. You know, I know you did the one for Databricks, and I feel like in the next year or two, as other connections and things happen with Fabric and in the Power BI platform, I have a suspicion that like there might be something else that pops up from you sometime in the future as well.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that I know how to do it.
One final question to wrap up, and then I think we can finish off. John had one good last question. So, does your extension work with GCC or sovereign tenants?
That's a good question.
For context, for people not familiar with either of those, do you have like a quick summary of what those are for people listening in?
Yeah, so most of us that work with Power BI or Azure use the public cloud, but there is also specific ones for governments, for example, or for China. I know it's also a specific one that has like some, but how to say, like some limitations that set up slightly different, which is a bit more secure, for example, or it's whatever. And some parts work slightly different there. Regarding that extension, whether it's supporting sovereign clouds or governmental clouds, I don't know. Basically, it boils down to authentication, and what I use for authentication is the Visual Studio Code built-in authentication provider for Microsoft accounts. If that supports sovereign and governmental clouds, then I think it should also work for those. And I also have to say that I also try to use this solution or this extension at one of my customers, but they had pretty strict Active Directory limitations where you have like two-factor authentication and a certificate on the laptop, etc. That's also something where I couldn't get it to work yet. So, but
it sounds like it's a bit of a case-by-case basis, but in theory, given all the boxes that have been checked, it should. But there's just a few more hoops to jump through.
Yeah. So as I said, like I'm basically relying on the Visual Studio Code integration with Azure Active Directory. Whatever is supported there, whatever is working there, I can use. If it's not working, well, I can't really do much about it.
Yep.
I'm afraid.
That's fair. Excellent. Well, then with that, I think we can wrap up. But this has been fantastic. I appreciate you taking time out of your Friday evening to join on for this. So thank you so much for coming on. And definitely as this space continues to evolve, I'm hoping there will be good opportunity to get you back on sometime in the next year or so to talk about some other cool stuff as we continue to build up speed as this hype train moves forward with Fabric and everything else.
Yep. Sure. Cool. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Then, yeah, you enjoy your weekend. Everyone else, thanks for tuning on. And also, I will see all of you on Friday when Eric Svensson from Copenhagen will be on to talk about some cool stuff as well. So, all right.
Great.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye then. Ciao.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.